You're watching news at Prime. Let's get into this conversation now. Questions have been raised about Ebrahim Rasool's conduct when he arrived back in the country. This as relations between South Africa and one of its biggest trading partners, the United States, remains tense. South African Institute of International Affairs chairperson Moeletsi Mbeki is with us tonight. He joins us in studio. It's good to have you with us tonight, and welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be here.
Let me start with the questions that surround the tense relationship between the United States and South Africa. You'll choose whether you want to give a comment or two about Ebrahim Rasool, and I don't know whether you watched what he said, but I'd like to take it a step further and ask about these growing concerns between South Africa and its relationships on the global stage. How would you characterize this specific relationship between South Africa and the US? And for you, what is at stake if not repaired soon?
There's a huge amount at stake, more for South Africa than for the United States. Many years ago, I was involved with the sanctions against the apartheid government. I was a member of the Commonwealth Technical Sanctions Committee. And it was the Commonwealth that partly influenced the United States Congress to impose sanctions on the apartheid regime in South Africa. One of the stipulations of the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, which was passed by the American Congress, was that the top committees of Congress, like Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, had to monitor every year and report back to Congress what was happening to the implementation of the sanctions against the apartheid regime.
Yeah.
Now, somewhere in the middle of 1989, these committees met in Switzerland. It was July in 1989. These were the top committees of Congress. And myself and Francis Wilson, the late Professor Francis Wilson, were chosen to be resource people in that conference where they were discussing what was happening with the implementation of the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act.
Yeah.
What we noticed, Francis and myself noticed, first, South Africa was represented by the then Director General, Neil van Heerden. But the Soviet Union had its deputy foreign minister. But there was a representative from Japan. There was a representative from France. There was a representative from the United Kingdom. There was a representative from Germany. So Francis and myself were wondering, what are these people doing? Because it's supposed to be an internal review of an American law. So when it got to them addressing the South African representative, Neil van Heerden, they told Neil that they have brought representatives from these 4 countries because these countries are taking market share from the United States. The United States has imposed sanctions on South Africa, but Japan, England, France, and Germany are taking the market share of American companies. So they told Van Heerden that if you don't sort out the apartheid problem, we are going to instruct our partners. Remember, these are their allies. We are going to instruct them to impose the same sanctions that we have imposed on South Africa.
Right.
So what we don't say, I was at the conference, unfortunately, Francis Wilson died a year or so ago, I was sitting there and listening to what these guys were telling Neil van Heerden. What we don't understand, or what this government doesn't understand, is that if the Americans act against them, they have this massive network of allies and alliances who they can activate against South Africa. And that's what happened with the apartheid government, and they warned them, and they actually brought those people to their conference, and they warned Neil van Heerden, that's what we're going to do if you don't settle this issue.
But this point is interesting, because who right now would you argue is allied to America and has not been upset by the Trump administration?
The Trump administration has upset a lot of people. It has upset the Germans, it has upset the British, it has upset the French, but all these countries are under the American security umbrella. So when push comes to shove, when America says to them, jump, they ask how high.
President Ramaphosa, do you believe he's providing the necessary leadership? Has he provided leadership from the get-go?
I don't think so. I think this situation should never have been allowed to run away the way it to the extent of having South Africa's ambassador being expelled. He should have been instructed the first time he spoke out of 10. He should have been instructed either pull back and call back to be dressed down and told not to do it again, or it should have been removed by the South African government. Because this wasn't the first time he was involving himself in the internal politics of the host country.
Yeah. Do you believe that he may have worsened the situation with his speech yesterday?
Certainly, he didn't improve. The president had instructed the ANC and other government officials, including himself, to tone down and to lower the temperature on this issue. And what did we see at Cape Town Airport? Not only did he come with a prepared speech, which proceeded to attack the United States and proceeded to give an analysis. Even before he gave an analysis to the president, he's making an analysis out there on the street. And I was asking myself, what's this guy's agenda exactly?
I'm moving on from this point because of time constraints. But how do you deal with an administration whose posture appears to be, if it's not showboating, it is political brinkmanship of the worst kind? How do you deal with that?
Well, I don't know how you deal with it, but you have the interests of your own country to look after. At the end of the day, we don't want a fight with the United States, because there is no fight with the United States that South Africa can win. None. There isn't a single fight we can win against the United States. There are people like Gwede Mantashe saying that, oh, let's not sell them our platinum. Platinum, nobody wants platinum anymore. Platinum was critical during the time of fossil fuel vehicles to clean the exhaust fumes of petrol and diesel cars. The world is moving to electric cars. So platinum is not an asset that anybody wants to buy. If you look at the price of platinum, it's stuck at $900 an ounce, while gold is up at 3,000. They used to move together. So there is nothing we have that the Americans want from us. They buy it if it's there. They buy their chrome from us. But the American chrome, they have massive stockpiles of these kinds of projects, of these kinds of materials. So there is no way we can win a conflict with the United States. But our government doesn't seem to understand that. Somehow they seem to think we can fight the United States and win.
I'd like to come back to domestic politics. Parliament has yet to put a stamp of approval on the budget that was tabled by the finance minister much earlier. What do you make of this delay? Is it a sign of weakness or perhaps disunity within the GNU?
Well, I think there's a bigger problem, and many people have pointed this out. The ANC hasn't understood what happened on May 29th, 2024. They haven't understood that they lost an election. They are being kept in power, first and foremost by the DA. For Cyril Ramaphosa to be elected by Parliament to be president of South Africa, Toko Diza to be a speaker, Paul Mashatile to be the deputy president, they had to be the vote, the DA had to put his vote behind them. So they have to sit down and agree every step of the way on the way forward with the DA and all these other parties that are there in the government of national unity.
If not passed, ultimately, what risks does it pose for service delivery and investor confidence?
Well, leave aside service delivery. What risk does it pose from the 20 or something million people who are on social grants? Because those people, every day, they depend on social welfare, which comes from the budget. What are they going to be eating the following day if there's no money that is paid to them?
Well, the minister in the presidency seems to believe that there is a stopgap measure, and it simply is to revert to the previous year's budget. In other words, you continue on the path of the previous government whilst a plan is being worked out to try and pass this one.
Yeah, there is a temporary holding operation, yes. But how long will that last for? I think it's 40% of last year's budget can be dispersed.
The nub of the question, it would seem, is with the VAT increase. Do you believe that Enoch Godongwana is correct in his approach, that yes, we can talk about strengthening SARS in order to for it to have muscle to collect more money, while also closing the taps in the leakages, whether you call it corruption, you can define it as such. Because his is that there is a budget shortfall now of 60 billion, and that has to be plugged. You agree with his VAT increase stance?
But why is there, he's not explaining, why is there a 60 billion rand budget shortfall? I don't know why there is one. Do I believe him there is a shortfall that must be plugged? The answer is I don't believe him.
Why not?
Because he's not credible. Most of us in the country don't believe him because he's not credible. He's not credible to the population. The government is not trusted by the people of South Africa. So why should we believe him when he says there's a shortfall of 60 billion? Where does the figure come from? Why can't he go and borrow money? Why isn't he borrowing if there is such a shortfall? Why is he punishing the poor with a regressive tax like value-added tax?
When you say he's not credible, where does that come from?
All the surveys about who is most trusted in South Africa, they show that the government is way at the bottom of the trust table by the population. Top of the trust table is civil society and the private sector. Those are the most trusted institutions in our country. They are at the top of trust by the population. The government is the least trusted.
Yeah.
Political parties are the least trusted in South Africa. So when Godongwana comes and says, I have shortfall of 60, why does he think we believe him?
You've spoken openly about President Ramaphosa's leadership. Looking back at his administration, he's had a good number of years now in power. What do you see as successes and perhaps failings?
Okay, let me start with success. His success is really forming the government of national unity. I thought he had a good option which he could pursue of a minority government. But he didn't pursue that. He went for this coalition's government of national unity. So I think that was a good choice. It was positive leadership. But now Cyril doesn't know how to control the institutions that he's in charge of. I think he has a confidence problem. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I think he lacks confidence. So he told COSATU, the Communist Party, the ANC in the Western Cape, cool it about the American conflict. What do? They ignore him, and they hold a huge rally to receive Rasool from the United States. What's he going to do to them? Nothing.
Let's wind this down. How visible are these internal divisions in the ANC? And by extension, well, I think what is quite visible are divisions indeed in the government of national unity. But the language from the president himself is that these are part and parcel of a coalition government. It goes through this. If you look at governments of the world, developed nations, they do go through this. But in South Africa, though, right now, as we speak of a budget that's yet to pass, are we staring down a governance crisis, or, again, these are the teething problems of a coalition arrangement?
Well, you see, the thing that the South African government forgets, we are not a developed country. We have 40% unemployment. We have 50 to 60% of young people between the age of 15 and 24 sitting at home, unemployed and not in education. What does that give you? It gives you a powder keg. So you cannot compare yourself to Germany. You cannot compare, which has coalitions which take forever to negotiate. You can't compare yourself to Denmark. In South Africa, if there is if there is a crisis in the state, you can have a blow up in our country. In July 2021, we had a massive blow up in South Africa.
Yeah.
Where was there a massive blow up in Germany? Where was there a massive blow up in Denmark, in Sweden, where they have coalition governments that take months and months to negotiate? They are not the powder keg that South Africa is. South Africa is a powder keg. And the guys in the ANC, they live in ivory tower and they drive these blue lights. They didn't even notice that the traffic lights are not working because they don't have to stop at traffic lights. They are totally detached from the reality of South Africa. So they keep comparing themselves to say, and minimizing the consequences of the problem.
Yeah.
They couldn't control the riots in July 2021. Couldn't control. 400 people got killed, not by the police, by this anarchy. Huge amounts of assets of the country went up in flames, 50 billion, according to one estimate.
Yeah.
But these guys are sitting there saying, no, this is a minor crisis. They don't really understand the risk that South Africa sits with.
Final question. This government of national unity at the moment, the disagreement about the budget, it looks, and I'm very careful to use these words, it looks to be on the rocks. The Democratic Alliance, if you believe the Sunday Times this past weekend, seems to suggest they've not been consulted. The parties that are being consulted are the EFF, MK Party, and more recently, the Action SA Party, as possible replacements of the Democratic Alliance. If indeed the current arrangement as it stands collapses, who is best suited to fill the gap that will be left by the Democratic Alliance? Again, I stress the words, if this current arrangement collapses.
Jacob Zuma was kicked out as president of the country by Cyril Ramaphosa. Julius Malema was kicked out as president of the ANC Youth League by Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, just ask yourself one question. Why should these two rescue the government of Cyril Ramaphosa? What they do, they want him to be vulnerable, and they will use it to destroy his government.
That's it?
That's it.
Wow. Moeletsi Mbeki, thank you very much for your time and analysis tonight. He is the chairperson of the South African Institute of International Affairs.